Well, good morning everybody to this first session where we're going to be looking at progress towards the UK Peatland Strategy goals. And we've got representatives from each of the 4 UK devolved countries, from governments and government agencies, giving us an update on where they are with their individual plans. Craig Bennett mentioned at the start in his talk about the flexibility towards a devolved structure, but operating within a consistent UK peatland strategy. And I think that's the important thing, that we have got devolved countries, each tackling peatlands and their partnerships in their own way, but working to a common set of goals and objectives. And frankly, sharing experience across the UK and having that partnership approach even throughout the devolved administrations. And it's been very healthy and very helpful to have that sharing of knowledge, sharing of experience, and not least, it allows us also to share experience internationally as well. And so this morning, I'm going to introduce our 4 country presentations. Our first one is going to be England, and we will have Sophie Chapman, followed by Naomi Oakley. If there are any glitches in Naomi's presentation, we will go on to another one, but we'll see if we can get her sorted out. But first presentation is going to be Sophie Chapman, who is head of soils and peatlands team at DEFRA, and she's going to give us an update from the England perspective. Thank you.
Hello. I think many of you know me. My name is Sophie Chapman and I'm Head of Peatland Recovery Policy at DEFRA, and along with Naomi Oakley from Natural England, I'll be giving an update on what has been happening over the past year in England. I'd say it's been a good year. We finally got the England Peat Action Plan published, formerly the England Peat Strategy, and it was a huge relief to finally get that out there. We also launched the Nature for Climate Fund. It's fair to say it's been a fairly busy year. In terms of an update, it's probably easier if I just go through the 4 main pillars of the England Peat Action Plan and what we've done in each of the areas. And they are restore, so restoring peatland wherever it's feasible. Reduce, so reducing the degradation where it's not feasible to fully restore, and develop more responsible agricultural practices that protect the soil and limit the emission, well, the greenhouse gas emissions from the peat soil. Protecting peat from some of the most damaging practices, and finally driving progress through better data and enhanced institutional arrangements. So in terms of restoration, we set our target to restore at least 35,000 hectares by 2025, though to be clear, this is just the start, and we'll be setting out what our ambition to 2050 will look like in the Net Zero strategy, which should be coming out before COP26. And also Natural England will be publishing an implementation plan, which Naomi is going to tell you a bit more about. In late April, Natural England launched the Nature for Climate Fund grant scheme, both the restoration grants, and we announced the first investments of them in August, and Naomi is going to say a bit more about these. A really exciting sort of width and breadth of the country on them. We also launched the discovery grants, which allow organisations to scope and plan their restoration projects, and this has been a really exciting area to be working on. It's been really great to see the applications coming from areas of the country that haven't been as involved in peatland restoration before, so that should really feed into the next round of restoration grants. And we should be announcing the winners of the first round of the discovery grants in the autumn. And then on reducing degradation, we launched the Lowland Agricultural Peat Task Force, chaired by Robert Caldwell, I think back in January. And this is in recognition of the fact that the vast majority of our greenhouse gas emission, our peatland greenhouse gas emissions in England come from lowland peat that is in agricultural use, as you can clearly see from this pie chart. Robert will actually be speaking at a session on Thursday. So if you want to hear more about where he's got to and his findings so far, then please do attend that. The task force is independent, and it'll be making recommendations to government in summer 2022 on how we can more responsibly manage, how these peatlands can be more responsibly managed, and then the government will consider the recommendations. The task force also has 5 subgroups, one focused solely on polluter and how we can develop a commercially viable roadmap to implementing these practices. And I know a lot of you are involved in that, and also recognising the very specific local contexts of the various regions of England. We've also launched 4 regional subgroups. So we've got in the east, focusing on the fens and broads, the southwest focusing on the levels, Somerset levels and moors, and then the various different pockets in the northwest and the pockets in the northeast as well. And then on protecting peat, so we announced that we would ban the sale of peat and peat-containing products by the end of this Parliament, and a full consultation on the potential regulations will be published this year, so get ready to respond to that. And then in February, we brought forward legislation to introduce new restrictions on managing burning on protected blanket bog, with a ban on burning unless covered by a licence in very limited circumstances granted by the Secretary of State. And this is protecting around 142,000 hectares of England's upland deep peat. And we did say in the England Peat Action Plan that the government will keep under review the case for extending this to additional areas after assessing how the new regime works in practice. And then finally, on driving progress and in boosting the institutional arrangements for peatland recovery, we're working in partnership with all of the DEFRA delivery bodies, but Natural England in particular will take a leading role. Naomi is going to be talking next about what will be happening with the implementation plan. We're also developing a new range of information tools. Most notably, work has begun on the Enhanced England Peat Map, and I believe Andy Webb from Natural England will be leading a session on that on Wednesday, so if you want to attend that and hear a bit more about what's already happened there. And at this point, I shall hand over to Naomi. Thank you, everyone.
So that's excellent to hear the progress that's being made in England, and I think it's fair to say that the DEFRA team now have a substantial number of individuals helping tackle both upland and, as you heard, lowland peatland issues, and it's great to see the structures now in place to help take that forward. We're going to move now to Northern Ireland, and we've got Sara McGuckin from the Northern Ireland Environment Agency, and she's the head of the natural science and the natural environment division there, and their strategy in Northern Ireland was consulted, and that consultation period's now finished. So they have a strategy for 2021 to 2040, and we'll hear more about that from Sara now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Clifford. Good morning, everyone. Delighted to be here this morning to give you an update just on where we're at with peatlands in Northern Ireland. Just because time flies since the last time we were providing this update last year. So really, what I kind of wanted to focus on, this is really just to give you an outline, is to set out how we are taking our work forward in line with the UK Peatland Strategy. And so I'll be providing an update on the peatland strategy, where we're at with funding, management and restoration, the progress that we've been made in terms of conservation management planning, getting that detail right. A number of pieces of work have been taken forward in terms of improving our mapping and extent and condition of our peatland resource, and then a particular focus on looking at one of the key pressures on our peatland habitats, which is nitrogen deposition. So our long-awaited peatland strategy, issued for consultation early in the summer, and this, as you would expect, aligns with the UK strategy, and is based on 6 strategic objectives, which you'll see set out there: to conserve peatland and prevent degradation, to restore our degraded areas to function peatland ecosystems, to support sustainable peatland management, improve our knowledge sharing and research, particular focus on communication, education and access, particularly with the public and key interested parties, including our landowners, and also on an improving governance, implementation and funding for the range of policy proposals contained within the strategy. So the 12-week consultation closed on the 1st of September, and a lot of it was really setting out and making the case for peatland restoration and the role that it plays in providing for nature, people and the economy, and the particular role that it will play in delivering our carbon targets and providing nature-based solutions. Some of the proposed actions include a very strategic peatland policy, which will ensure that legislation and policies across government support peatland protection and restoration. Another focus on upland management to ensure that we are supporting activity in the uplands, but also ensuring that we can manage and reduce wildfire risk, but improve the condition of our upland peatlands and ensure that they can provide the wide range of ecosystem services that we know they can and should be able to provide. A number of proposals there just on the use and important sale of peat compost, and also looking at land management schemes going forward to ensure that land managers and farmers are being, I suppose, supported to manage and protect this important resource. In terms of next steps, there will be a summary of responses issued by the end of November, and then we'll be moving to finalise the strategy and put in place a very action-focused implementation plan early in 2022. I suppose alongside the peatland strategy, we're also operating in an extremely busy policy landscape, particularly in 2021 and 2022. Most notably, we're working very closely with colleagues on the policy side and with our counterparts in England, Scotland and Wales as we prepare for the global biodiversity framework, which will emerge from COP15, which is closely aligned, thankfully and gratefully, with COP26, where both of the COPs, both for biodiversity and for climate change, recognise the need for coherent alignment between policy measures for nature and climate. So that will inform the UK biodiversity framework and our biodiversity strategy, which will, as you would expect, focus a lot on peatlands as well. A number of other strategy and policy areas listed below, which all have a key role to play in ensuring that we are protecting and enhancing our peatland resource. Most notably, our environment strategy should be issuing for consultation before the end of the year, as well as a green growth strategy that will really start to ensure that any development that takes place in Northern Ireland is sustainable and will be protecting our natural environment. In terms of funding and management, in terms of current activity, we continue to invest and be very active under the Interreg project or programme, which has been funding conservation management planning and active restoration of peatland and wetland habitats through our 2 projects, CAN and CAB. So we're very grateful to the wonderful partnerships that have been set up under those 2 programmes that have really pulled together some amazing evidence on the state of our peatland habitats and what needs to happen to restore them, and are actively implementing some of those. Our environmental farming scheme continues to support peatland restoration, and interestingly, we have a particular focus on non-designated priority habitat in the current tranche in 2021. So we'll be pushing to get as many robust restoration agreements out for that important priority habitat, and then looking at the ongoing rollout of group schemes where we're looking at that landscape scale restoration with a number of landowners. We have funded an additional £1.2 million worth of peatland projects under the Environment Fund and associated green growth funds in 2021, which are funding additional management plans, active restoration, and more monitoring in terms of carbon flux towers and ammonia. In terms of the future, we have been working very closely with SEUPB, who are the special body that deal with the European funding. Peace Plus is a EU-funded programme that will continue to fund peace and prosperity projects and programmes across Northern Ireland and the border counties of the Republic of Ireland. And we are delighted that biodiversity, nature recovery and resilience will focus heavily in the next programme. It's currently allocated €15 million, but we will continue to be in discussions around the scale of the challenge and the cost of delivering across our range of habitats. It will build on the success of the Interreg project, and so we'll continue to focus on our peatland and wetland habitats to ensure that the plans that we have developed will actually be implemented, and start to see how we can draw that into the wider nature recovery networks and ensuring a greater connection with nature, with the local population. We will continue to scope out our resilient peatland programme, which will really look at what the challenges are and the policy proposals coming out of the peatland strategy to ensure that we are developing robust provision for landscape scale restoration to meet both our nature and climate targets, and looking at scoping our funding needs and delivery mechanisms to ensure that they're aligned with programmes and support mechanisms across the wider department. We have been continuing to invest in our conservation management plans, which are focused primarily at this stage on our special areas of conservation. And this includes our peatland SACs, and we hope to have those completed by December 2021. What they do is provide us with an awful lot of really valuable evidence on the state of those peatlands and how we go about restoring them, therefore helping us build the right funding mechanisms going forward and developing the partnerships. In terms of peatland evidence, we are continuing to test and refine our living map product, and including the addition of prototyping a number of apps which will help us with change detection and also a better handle on a number of proxy measures for peatland condition. We're working very closely with JNCC on that, and hope to be in a position to have our first iteration later this year. What we have found with the refining and testing is that we've quite a diverse geology in Northern Ireland. So a lot of our analysis is now being carried out based on our four broad geological zones, so that we can make sure that any of the predictions that we can use from our Earth observation data is as accurate as possible. This will continue to be ground truth through our habitat survey activity, and also the new countryside survey that will be commissioned later on this year to take place in 2022. So we're very excited to see how that moves forward, because that will provide us an awful lot of valuable information on the state of nature across the Northern Ireland countryside, in particular with our peatlands. We are also working closely with Ulster Wildlife and the Hutton Institute around how we make best use of the data that we have available, and some of the modelling approaches that the Hutton Institute have been able to use in Scotland, so that we've got a much clearer handle on our peatland resource and its extent of peatland storage and emissions, to help inform our funding programme and our targeted restoration programmes going forward. The big issue for our peatlands continues to be nitrogen deposition and local deposition of ammonia emissions. So our science programme on this continues. We are now funding the monitoring of ammonia concentrations across 6 of our special areas of conservation in association with the Interreg CAN project, continuing to carry out landscape scale ammonia monitoring, looking at specific bioindicators to help improve our common standards monitoring for the condition of our peatlands. We have developed a nitrogen profiling framework for our sites so that we can get a much better handle on the type and extent of the nitrogen pressures on sites and the likely sources for those emissions so that we can better target the mitigation. And I've been working closely with CEH, JNCC and other parts of the UK on the Nitrogen Futures project, which will help us with informing more effective spatial targeting going forward for ammonia emissions. This will all be informing the draft ammonia strategy, which has been prepared and should issue for consultation soon, which will put forward a comprehensive approach to ammonia reduction, hand in hand with protection and restoration of habitats to improve their resilience. So finally, in terms of the way forward, there's an awful lot going on in this area, but we recognise that in this year and next, there will need to be a particular focus and prioritisation for peatland restoration. So we'll be moving quickly to move forward on a development and action-based implementation plan, along with our policy colleagues within DEFRA, scoping our resilient peatland programme, and building our evidence base across the piece. There's an awful lot to do in terms of taking forward the post-2020 biodiversity targets and the link to nature recovery networks, increasing connectivity and delivering against the 30 by 30 target. So we see our peatland resource at a landscape scale playing a key role in this. And to make all this happen, we will need to work hand in hand with a range of our stakeholders, our agricultural policy colleagues, and also landowners to ensure that this happens on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. That's excellent, and it's great to hear the progress in Northern Ireland and during these difficult times. Well done on the team getting the strategy out. Interesting as well to hear, obviously, there is still EU funding and connection with EU initiatives. And we did talk at previous conferences about the need for the rest of the UK to look at how it fills the gap in EU funding. But excellent news there for Northern Ireland. And also important about the nitrogen deposition work. And I think it is relevant to the rest of the UK, but perhaps not as concentrated a problem as Northern Ireland's facing. Now, going to introduce our next speaker, who is Eilidh Henry at the Scottish Government. Eilidh's the Programme Manager for the Natural Resources Division in the Environment and Forestry Directorate within Scottish Government. And Eilidh's going to let us know what's been going on across there. And then we'll also have a presentation from Andrew Coupar at NatureScot. Andrew's the Policy and Advice Manager for Uplands and Peatlands within NatureScot, and he'll follow on straight after Eilidh. Over to you, Eilidh.
Hi, I'm Eilidh Henry, Programme Manager and Senior Policy Officer for Peatland Restoration in the Scottish Government. I'm based in the Peatlands and Land Quality team in the Directorate for Environment and Forestry, and today I'm providing an update on Scotland's progress with all things peat alongside my colleague Andrew Coupar from NatureScot. I'll start by giving an overview of the policy context in Scotland and the commitments and actions that are being taken at a national level, and then Andrew can provide some more detailed insight into progress and challenges on the ground. So to start with the policy context, basically peat is a big thing in Scotland and we have a lot of it. Peatlands of 50 centimetre depth or more cover around 30% of Scotland's land surface, which is around 2.3 million hectares, and that doesn't include peat that's covered with forests. which is shown in green on the image on the slide. So still quite a substantial amount of land cover. In good condition, as we all know, peatlands sequester carbon. It's estimated that Scottish peatlands currently store about 1.7 billion tonnes of carbon, which is equivalent to 140 years' worth of Scotland's total annual greenhouse gas emissions. But unfortunately, around 80% of Scotland's peatlands are degraded. And Scotland's greenhouse gas statistics were published in July this year. And as a result of revisions to the greenhouse gas inventory, the land use change and forestry sector is now shown to be a net source of greenhouse gas emissions for all periods. So because of this, and now especially in sharp relief, protecting and restoring degraded peatlands has become a priority for Scottish ministers and is a key component in our efforts to reduce emissions in the land use change and forestry envelope and our wider ambitions to reach net zero in Scotland by 2045. The other benefits of healthy peatland habitats are also extremely important to Scottish Government policy agendas, from biodiversity to flood risk mitigation and improving water quality. I also wanted to touch on natural capital, as natural capital thinking has really recalibrated the value attached to peatlands, and it's really brought them into focus, and restoration of degraded peatlands is seen as an essential nature-based solution to the twin crises of the climate emergency and the loss of biodiversity. And through supporting skilled green jobs in communities across rural Scotland, peatland restoration also has a role in supporting our just transition to net zero. And this fits into wider work developing our national strategy for economic transformation in Scotland, which will deliver a focused plan of actions and projects to help transform our economy. So peatland restoration is really taking place in this much wider context of recognising the importance of the natural world. I also wanted to just note for context that following the Scottish Parliament elections in May this year, we now have a new government with a cooperation agreement in place between the Scottish Government and the Scottish Green Party. And this has resulted in 2 Green Party members entering national government as ministers, which is a UK first, with Patrick Harvey joining as the Minister for Zero Carbon Buildings, Active Travel and Tenants' Rights, and Lorna Slater joining as Minister for Green Skills, Circular Economy and Biodiversity. So we see that this will obviously have a focus on net zero and the natural environment in their interests, but they'll also work alongside other ministers and cabinet secretaries that are listed up on the slide to deliver the wide-reaching agenda around net zero. And we've seen in manifestos and plans for the new parliamentary session continued commitment to peatland restoration and a commitment to ban the sale of peat-related gardening products in Scotland as well. So over the past 6 months or so, our team in Scottish Government has grown quite considerably, and we're now thinking a lot more about peatlands in the round. We have ongoing commitments and policy development work that can be grouped into these 3 categories: protecting peatlands, restoring peatlands and managing peatlands. So under protecting peatlands, our 2019 to 20 programme for government pledged to phase out the use of horticultural peat by increasing uptake of alternative growing media. And as a first step in that process, there's now also a commitment to ban the sale of peat-related gardening products in Scotland, and officials are working to deliver a consultation on this. Planning also comes under this heading, and though the current Scottish planning policy already sets quite a high bar of protection, the upcoming National Planning Framework 4 will have more to say on this. In the position statement published in November 2020, we outlined that we will aim to restrict commercial peat extraction and development on peatland and facilitate restoration through permitted development rights. And with restoring peatlands, as set out in our climate change plan update, which was published in December last year, we have committed to an annual target of restoring 20,000 hectares of degraded peatlands to total 250,000 hectares by 2030. And at least £250 million has been committed to support this work over a 10-year period, with £22 million for peatland restoration this financial year alone. And the Scottish Government's infrastructure and investment plan sets out a committed capital budget for peatland restoration over the next few years, and it's hoped that this multi-year agreement will give contractors the confidence needed to invest in the plant and skills to drive this work forward over the coming years and decades. And while that's all really good progress, we still have a lot to do to achieve these ambitious targets. Since 2012, around 30,000 hectares of peatlands have been restored in Scotland, and we're currently restoring around 6,000 hectares per year. So this rate of progress illustrates the scale of the challenge we face, but we're committed to significantly increasing these figures and are taking forward actions to deliver the restoration targets we have. I'll come on to those a bit more in a minute. We also have some policy work on managing peatlands more in the long term. So in the Scottish Government's response to the Wednesday report, we set out that legislation will be brought forward to ban muir burn on peatland, except in very limited cases, and we'll undertake a review of the current definition of peatland, taking expert advice on whether it should be revised and a stricter definition imposed. And the actions being taken forward in response to the Deer Working Group report also acknowledge the vital need to protect peatlands from further damage if we're to meet our climate change and biodiversity commitments. And as I mentioned before, there are a number of challenges we're facing when it comes to meeting our peatland restoration targets, but there are opportunities too, and a range of actions that we're taking to progress things. So this slide sort of shows the challenges and opportunities on the left and the corresponding actions on the right, though they don't quite all match up with the arrows and there is quite a lot of overlap. So I'll just talk through the challenges and opportunities that we have and the actions that we're taking as they relate to them. So first up, as I've already mentioned, our big challenge is to scale up restoration and to move from around 6,000 hectares a year to 20,000 hectares a year plus. And we're taking action on that by establishing a new Scottish Government-led programme which will give us a renewed governance structure to drive forward this work and bring together all of our stakeholders who can really help in addressing some of the barriers that exist on the ground and at a high level. And that'll include renewing our vision for peatlands in Scotland. We're also commissioning NatureScot to have a look at this problem and to give us some ideas and options for new models or new ideas in how we can transform how we do peatland restoration in Scotland. But on the ground, when work is actually being done, there are obviously a number of operational challenges. That includes a short working window in the year, which can be limiting in terms of how much progress can be made. And that's impacted by weather conditions and nesting birds. And while there's little we can do about the weather, we are thinking more about how bird breeding season can be sort of acknowledged and adapted and adapt the peatland restoration process to fit in with this. So NatureScot are considering whether there may be new risk-based approaches that could be taken at a site level to see whether the window for peatland restoration could be opened up a bit more and allow more flexibility for contractors who are undertaking this work on the ground. And contractor capacity is the next challenge that I've put up there. As peatland restoration is a relatively new sector, there's still a need to upskill a lot of people in this field and to create confidence with contractors and provide assured investment. So peatland restoration skills and training fits into a wider piece of work that's been taken forward by the Scottish Government to deliver good green jobs as part of COVID-19 recovery and progress towards net zero. The Scottish Government has recently established an independent commission to conduct a review of land-based learning, which will provide advice on green skills, and that will include peatland restoration. And NatureScot have also recently published an action plan for nature-based skills, which gives us a route map to develop the skills and opportunities needed to transition to net zero by 2045. And multi-year funding, which I mentioned before, that's already been secured, we hope that that will also provide confidence and assurance to contractors over the coming years. But with finance, though we have our public commitment of £250 million over the next 10 years, we know that we also need private green investment to deliver peatland restoration on the scale that we want to see and to manage this peatland restoration activity long into the future. So we're hearing a lot of growing interest from private investors in peatland restoration at the moment, but we're not quite seeing that investment come forward just yet. We're working with a number of partners and exploring different models and approaches, of which Peatland Code is one, to attract more private finance to peatland restoration. And the next thing on the left-hand side list is crofting, which really is an opportunity for us here in Scotland, as there's around or more than 500,000 hectares of common grazing lands in Scotland, much of which is on peatland. So it has a huge potential to contribute, but there's also a complex picture here of land use and land use rights. So we're considering working on some pilot projects on Scottish Ministers' crofting estate to explore the opportunities and challenges of peatland restoration for crofting communities. And the next thing we're thinking about is targeting peatland restoration, considering how we optimise the delivery of carbon, nature and other services from the work that we undertake. And basically we have a lot of work going on under the headline of what peat where, considering exactly where we can get the most for least and be cost effective in this work. So our Scottish Government analysts are working on scenario mapping that will allow us to see potential outcomes from different land use decisions. And we're running a CivTech challenge, which is a digital innovation programme to explore how technology can help us identify the best sites for peatland restoration. All of this work's really important, and it's worth noting that while we currently work to targets in terms of hectares, which act as a proxy for emissions reductions, we will be moving over the next few years to emissions-based targets. So it's vital that we understand which peatlands offer the best emissions reduction to help us achieve our objectives going forward. And lastly, all of our peatland work really fits into a wider debate about how we use land in Scotland. And determining the optimal mix of land use involves a complex set of interlinked considerations and goals that are sometimes in tension. And to try and address this year the Scottish Government has established a new senior policy level governance structure, the Land Use Transformation Portfolio Board, who are working to determine and oversee this problem and consider the optimum use of land that will enable us to deliver the wide range of benefits we need to see, from sustainable food production to supporting communities to biodiversity and carbon storage. So that was a quick overview of what we're doing at the Scottish Government level, and I'll hand over to Andrew now for some more details. But I've put my contact details on the slide there if anyone would like to get in touch. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Eilidh. And now we'll just go straight into Andrew Coupar at NatureScot to continue with the Scottish update.
Thanks, Eilidh, and good morning, everyone. We'll just carry on with the update from Scotland and run through the objectives from the UK Peatland Strategy. So, starting off with conservation, our designated sites are in a fairly stable condition at the moment. No great sort of improvements, no great reductions in condition. Pressures, certainly no shortage of them. Identifying climate change as one, we're certainly getting more erratic weather, prolonged dry spells, some very wet spells. Even last winter was actually unusually cold and long compared with recent ones. Seeding from plantations, we've always had sort of trees escaping from the plantations out onto the bog, but this does seem to be becoming a bigger issue and a more geographically widespread issue. Deer, undoubtedly a pressure, and what we're now considering is sort of the implications of deer for peatland restoration and whether they're having an impact. We don't have much data on this yet, but it's something that we're certainly working on. Muirburn, we get very little at Muirburn on our peatlands, and that's covered in the Muirburn Code, and there should be consultation with Scottish Nature before any is undertaken, and it should only be if it's in connection with a peatland restoration project. Wildfire, certainly seeing more frequent wildfires and some larger wildfires now, and we're working with a number of partners on this, how to reduce the impacts and reduce the frequency. Renewables, particularly onshore wind farms, we get a lot of them. We're a windy country, a lot of our peatlands are in windy areas, so inevitably there's implications there. And we work together as well as we can to reduce those impacts. Restoration I've mentioned, Peatland Action Programme, we'll come back to that in a minute. We also have sort of regional programmes in Cairngorms, Ayrshire, Coygan and Assynt in the northwest. There are others. Some of the bigger projects have now finished, and people know they're out there sort of looking for funds to continue with more projects in the future. Peatland Action, focusing on it for the next few slides. So Scottish Government funded, the government is now funding, as well as NatureScot, also funding the National Parks, Forestry and Land Scotland and Scottish Water directly. NatureScot is taking on as well as being still issuing grants, it's also taking on a coordinating role, really just to ensure that across the delivery partners, there's sort of consistent practice, consistent standards, and that it's all monitored so that it can be collated and the overall results presented. In terms of delivery this year, the numbers aren't quite in for this year yet, but it looks like the area that's road will be very similar to the past couple of years. Afraid I don't yet have figures for the cost and the area feasibility studies undertaken. In terms of the activities we are undertaking in the peatland restoration, be familiar to many of you: ditch and gully blocking, reprofiling of ditches and gullies, and stabilise of peat pans through mulch, through plant plugs, etc. And that is proceeding well in a number of areas. Challenges: there's lots of challenges in the restoration side of things, and finding time to actually get the work done is one of the biggest. Many of our sites are remote. We have to consider sort of wildlife on the sites, including ground nesting birds, waders, raptors, etc. Grouse, another one, and there's also obviously a grouse shooting season, as there is deer stalking seasons, and we have to fit in with them. And winter, yeah, we do still get winters, and they can be quite prolonged. You never quite know when they're going to start and when they're going to finish, so they all have an effect on how much work can be done actually out on the ground. Adaptive management, uplands, lowlands, things happening there. Particularly to draw attention to a woodland establishment though. Because after the 1st of October this year, Scottish Forestry will no longer be accepting any Forest Grant Scheme applications that include ploughing, where that's going to disturb peat more than 10 centimetres deep. So that's quite a significant change, and this is all to do with the emissions that are being released when the soil is disturbed through preparation for planting. Sustainable management is what we're all aiming for, and we're working with a number of partners in, the renewables industry, peat extraction, Muirburn, improving practice. Mentioned the proposed Flow Country World Heritage Site, which is being led by Highland Council. Wide range of stakeholders involved in that, and sustainable management is high on the agenda for all of them. We have our nature-based solutions, the green finance, etc., sustainable funding, sustainable finance is just as important as the actual management. And a colleague of mine, Brendan Turvey, will be giving a presentation on blended finance on Thursday, I think it is. Coordination, it's all about working together, working in partnerships. So we have many partnerships on the go, coordinating activities. So that's both local, regional, national, international level. And that's it. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for fantastic work on the update in Scotland. And obviously this year with COP26 in Glasgow, it's fantastic that the Scottish Government have highlighted peatlands as one of their brands, if you like, internationally, and they certainly will be able to showcase some excellent initiatives, as will the rest of the UK, and you'll hear more about the COP26 and activities that this fantastic opportunity to showcase peatlands. Our next speaker then, to finish the 4 countries, is Peter Jones, long-standing member of the IUCN UK Peatland Programme. Peter is the lead specialist advisor for peatlands with Natural Resources Wales. And over to you, Peter.
Good morning, I'm Pete Jones and I work for Natural Resources Wales, and I'm going to provide the country update for Wales for this session. My 2 co-authors are Dr. Roswyn Leonard, who is NRW's project manager for our National Peatlands Action Programme, and Arwell Williams, who leads on peat issues for Welsh Government and is based in their agricultural, land use and soil policy team. So to start with, just a brief recap of the main features of our National Peatland Action Programme. At last year's country update, our Welsh Government colleague James Cook was able to announce that the programme had just been launched by the Welsh Government's Minister for Environment, Energy and Rural Affairs, and the programme can be, a link to the programme can be found here at the bottom left-hand corner of the slide. The overriding purpose of the programme is to contribute to both the declared nature emergency and climate change emergency in Wales by restoring peatlands, thus taking full advantage of the principle that peatlands in good condition are those best able to deliver the range of associated ecosystem services. And the programme is for an initial 5 years and is Welsh Government's primary mechanism for national delivery and coordination in Wales for peatlands. The programme has 6 priority action themes representing the primary context of peatland degradation here and where restoration is most needed, and we have a further 3 major cross-cutting themes covering coordination of activity, monitoring and the capture of restoration activity data, and increasing stakeholder support for and engagement in peatland restoration. So during our first year, we've managed to recruit the entire project team. So altogether now we have Roswin as our project manager, Annetta Rumble covering grants, finance and procurement, our 2 project officers, Rob Bacon and Jack Simpson, and then 2 new posts since December 2020 when we last gave an update, namely Dr. Esther Clues covering data and GIS, and Awel Jones covering communications and stakeholder engagement. In our first year, we also set up the all-important procurement frameworks to enable us to commission major elements of the groundworks and site assessment programme, and we were also able to set up 2 annual rounds of strategic allocated funding, with this year being able to make initial grant offers to an expanded range of 11 partners, including some with relatively little background to date in peatland restoration. This reflects the importance to us of building and expanding the capacity and reach of peatland restoration, which is one of our strategic aims. And then finally, we've employed a range of other mechanisms to achieve delivery, including a number of major new land management agreements and also the use of existing memoranda of agreements. So overall, in our first year, the project and its partners delivered restoration over more than 650 hectares, and this is roughly our annual delivery target based on current funding. The project delivered across 5 of the 6 priority action themes, and the map in the top right-hand corner shows a pretty good coverage of effort across Wales, and some 60% of our spend was delivered with partners through a range of mechanisms, reflecting the importance of this year's conference theme of peatlands in partnership. So for the next few slides, I just want to draw attention to the major contribution made by our main strategic partners in the first year of the programme, starting with the Brecon Beacons National Park, and to acknowledge the huge efforts of Paul Sinoduri and Richard Ball, along with many other colleagues, in delivering a programme of 55 hectares of eroded bog restoration using a wide range of techniques, including erosion, gully reprofiling and blocking, as shown in this drone image kindly provided by Richard. The park has followed this with further funding from Welsh Government's Sustainable Landscape, Sustainable Places grant, which is being used to deliver footpath improvements through eroded bog and another 75 hectares of eroded bog restoration. And they've also managed to resource a dedicated peatland project officer, Sam Ridge, and have also been very successful in mobilising significant volunteer effort for a range of baseline monitoring and assessment work. Moving north, as with the Brecon Beacons National Park Authority, Snowdonia made huge efforts to deliver a very challenging programme of work through a grant from the programme, and we wish to acknowledge the particular efforts of Rachel Harvey, David Roberts and Rhys Owen and a wide range of other SNPA colleagues in delivering this programme. As many of you will know through their sponsorship of last year's conference, Snowdonia National Park ran a successful peatland project, and various outputs are already available from that or in the final stages of preparation. So keep a lookout for those, and obviously contact Rachel for further information. And among the many highlights for the park in terms of peatland restoration since we last reported is the completion at Bwlch y Groes of the first restoration project in Wales, co-funded through Peatland Code and public funding. Rachel continues to provide advice on prospective peatland code projects in Wales and is staying on after the SMS project as the Parks peatland officer. Looking beyond now the significant capacity of our national parks, we managed to work with a range of other partners in Wales using land management agreements, and one of the largest of these projects was with the Eilidh Valley Trust, who manage a significant area of the Central Wales Cambrian Mountains. And the project this year focused on an extensive programme of gully blocking and low contour bunding in an upland context to help step up water levels over complicated bog margins much affected by erosion and peat wastage. This was a great example of a partnership project. It was complicated, large scale and an exceptionally remote site, and I think we're all very pleased with how it worked out. Further significant land management agreements were set up with RSPB to deliver large-scale gully blocking and contour blending at Lake Vyrnwy, and in partnership with Natural England at Fens and Wixel Mosses, in addition to the purchase of a key stepping stone block of peatland at the very edge of the peat body, we were able to fund a range of low contour bunding and main drain diversion works in the year the site celebrated 30 years of an NNR, and also the addition of a significant area of land around the edges of the site as further additions to the NNR. A genuinely innovative and landscape scale project. And then finally, for this slide, we've worked in partnership with an existing joint National Trust NRW project focusing on the headwaters of the River Conwy, with drone surveys of peat erosion areas being used to plan future restoration. Well, a particular feature of our project is that we also undertake direct delivery of restoration work, and our main focus to date has been upon afforested peatlands. Restoration of these areas offers some of the best opportunities for blanket bog habitat expansion and restoration of connectivity, but of course they pose a range of challenges, including heavily degraded and disturbed surfaces post clearfell, and very often the approach has to be one of initial tree and seeding clearance followed by groundwork, so a lot of effort was devoted to that. We also invested a lot of effort in funding work to identify priority areas of peatland to be incorporated in forest resource plans, and we've got a very good relationship with our forest planning and policy, forest operations and land management teams, and this is absolutely critical to ensuring we really achieve action at scale here in the future. Turning briefly now to some of our other major peatland projects in Wales, the new Life for Welsh Raised Bogs project has made extensive use of low contour elevation contour bunding to reduce hydrological gradients at bog margins and restore regimes characteristic of active raised bog, as shown in this lovely drone image provided by Ben Soames and Jake White from our project. The project is also undertaking large-scale management of dense millennia and scrub using a wetland harvester machine, and it is the first of our large-scale peatland projects to employ a dedicated comms officer in the form of our colleague Dana Thomas. I won't say too much more about this programme, as Patrick Green will be providing a session at the Conserving and Enhancing the Most Readily Recoverable Peatlands session later on this afternoon, so please try and join that. Finally, in terms of project examples, I come on to the Lost Peatlands project, a unique initiative led by Neath Port Talbot County Borough Council and funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. It began this year and will focus on kick-starting the restoration of formerly afforested blanket peat at its extreme southern limit in Wales, across the former South Wales coalfield, with a project focus on 100 hectares of peatland restoration, and with another 157 or so to be delivered by NRW across the Welsh Government woodland estate elements. And this is an image taken by my colleague Gareth Roberts, showing some of the ground smoothed post-afforested areas of blanket peat, which are already showing good signs of hydrological recovery. The Lost Peatlands project also has a major public and stakeholder engagement element, seeking to capture and or rekindle the significant interests which the communities of the South Wales valleys have in their often very degraded uplands, many of which of course bear the scars of past coal mining. This word cloud summarises the priority given by this project to reconnecting these urban and urban fringe communities with their lost peatland heritage, and captures some of the contribution which it is hoped peatlands can make to improving health and well-being. And finally, with this project, there is a significant research element led by Dr. John Walker at Swansea to address some of the critical evidence gaps relating to the restoration of forested peatlands, which were identified by the IUCN's Commission of Inquiry review on forested peatlands a few years ago. It's really fantastic to see this local authority-led initiative, and we're lucky in Wales in having some very dynamic and go-ahead local authorities, which we're planning to support further through the National Peatland Programme in the coming years. Well, I'm going to conclude now with some challenges, and I think it's always important to look at these, and I'm going to focus on the practical delivery and partnership end, as these are associated particularly with our ambitions for upscaling the project. So this isn't an exhaustive list of all our challenges by any means. The first is contractor capacity, and I'm sure this is an issue common to very many projects, and one which I think can only become more significant as the emphasis given to peatland restoration continues. One practical way we're trying to tackle this is through a programme of one-to-one engagement with our contractors, and Eilidh and a procurement colleague, Keith Edwards, are basically undertaking a huge Welsh road trip to all of our groundworks contractors to gain a better mutual understanding of the pressures, requirements and constraints which they work under, of which contractor training, I'm sure, will be an important element. A commitment to multi-year funding is one potential solution which we all recognise, as this helps contractors invest in staff, training and equipment, and this is something we're hoping to work towards. And of course, expanding the contractor base is another solution, and in our case we've found that by issuing grants to third parties, they tend to tap into a slightly different pool of contractors, thus expanding the overall base of effort. Expanding our range of delivery partners, this is an absolutely key part of this project, and in doing this we're making full use of one of the duties identified for NRW in the Environment Act Wales to develop area statements which involve discussions between local partners to identify priorities for the sustainable management of natural resources using a place-based approach. And to date, we've been focusing on North West Wales, where we've run workshops with a total of 30 players from 15 different organisations who've come together to identify local priorities, opportunities and constraints. And it's working well. We've been able to identify some critical shortfalls in capacity in some key priority areas, and our programme is now fully resourced to support and facilitate these discussions, which we're already finding is critical to our overall function, really, of coordinating peatland restoration activity. And we're also hoping that the expanded range of partners brought in through grant support will also expand our range of delivery partners. Moving into our more challenging restoration context is an issue. As time goes on, more and more of the low-hanging fruits will be exhausted, leaving us with a greater proportion of the harder to do and more expensive in per hectare terms. We need solutions which do not of themselves necessitate land purchase, as the socio-economic issues surrounding the restoration or even partial rewetting of our most heavily modified and carbon-emitting peatlands are at least as significant as the technical. So we're watching developments elsewhere with interest and will exploit the strengths of the area statement approach in developing ways forward here. Co-funding is always an issue. Life has sadly gone as a vehicle for new applications, but other platforms are coming online, including a range of PES-based alternatives, and there's a very, in a very real sense, there is mounting interest across the public sector. And then finally, there is the case for long-term support for future sustainable management. This is an issue which concerns many in the peatland community, and more potential options are likely to become available. And in Wales, we're investing significant effort in one of these, namely the development of the future sustainable farming scheme. So in conclusion, it only remains for me to thank you for your time and to provide some contact information here, and to say that we, along with the New Life for Welsh Raised Bogs project, look forward to welcoming you to Wales, we hope, in 2022. Many thanks.
Thank you, Peter. That's it. So we've now had our roundup of the 4 countries, and it's worth reflecting that this year is the first year now that the UK has a UK peatland strategy and 4 devolved country plans working within that framework, but each recognising its own devolved administration and approaches. And it really is a fantastic occasion, if you think about it, that we're at this stage. As I always say, strategies are strategies, and many of our bookshelves have dead and dying strategies on them. I think the crucial thing, the really crucial thing at this conference that we're flagging up and highlighting is the delivery of strategies, and how it requires all these people in the background, many of whom I hope are in our 600 strong audience, but the partners, the staff, the teams, the range of staff that are now employed helping deliver peatlands. And I think we should all be quite pleased at the way in which that has grown. This is a legitimate new industry that has formed around reshaping our land use and our peatlands. We're now going to have a half-hour session, Q&A session. And we've been joined, as well as our speakers, we've been joined by Ben Dipper from Scottish Government, Arwell Williams from the Welsh Government, and Ken Bradley from Northern Ireland, DEFRA, and Naomi Oakley from Natural England, who, because of internet connectivity problems, wasn't able to give her presentation, but I'm assured it's been uploaded and will be in the conference information, and you can ask Sara Proctor if you want to see that, because I'm not sure exactly where it's located within the conference materials. But welcome to all of you. I have a Rick Wakeman-like set of computer screens for those of you who are old rockers, and I have now got about 20 questions have come in. So I will read them out and let the panel come back, and I'll probably direct some of the questions at specific individuals. The first of the group of questions I'll take relates to research, monitoring and survey, primarily around how do we make sure we get the right funding to deliver the restoration, monitoring post-restoration benefits, monitoring the key, quantifying the key ecosystem services like carbon, methane, specific monitoring programs put in place to assess those, and building up our evidence base. So I'm going to ask, probably this is one for each of the 4 countries. I'll start in the order that we had our presentations. A view on how we get the funding for this vital research and monitoring, starting first maybe with Sophie.
Right, hello everyone. So we were quite careful to ensure that the Nature for Climate Fund grants included funding for monitoring and surveys and so on within the lifetime of the project. And particularly the new Discovery grants included funding for surveys. Obviously the environmental land management programs as they develop will also need to consider that as part of their package. And also the Enhanced England peat map will be an important part of that picture as well, so that we can build up that England-wide picture of the condition of our peatlands. Naomi, do you want to say anything?
I think the thing that's important to me is to remember that the need for balance between monitoring and evaluation and actually getting on and doing it. So we do a really good job in the right place, but that we are maybe sometimes more keen on taking more risk and so that we do actually get on and do this really important work that, and we don't use sometimes a lack of knowledge to hold us back from doing things. And I think that's where the monitoring and evaluation drives us forward with innovation. Thank you.
Thanks. It's important to say, I think there exactly, Naomi, that we mustn't be slaves to having all the information before we act. In some of this, we have to be frontiers people and equally adopting the precautionary approach when we're dealing with assessing impacts on peatlands. We mustn't become caught by the lack of evidence. But on the other hand, the evidence is what will help us get more funding, justify more effort, and bring the public on side. So over to Sara, Northern Ireland. What's your thoughts on the getting the resources, getting the right funding?
Yeah, we would place a great significant emphasis on carrying out monitoring and evaluation. We have, in terms of the development of the conservation management plans for our SECs, a significant part of that exercise has been on carrying out, doing that on the ground survey work and getting a lot of really detailed information on the extent and state of the peatland and what pressures and threats, so that we can really target the right measures. We have in terms of the plans themselves and some of the delivery of active restoration going on at the minute, we recognise that we will need to look at legacy funding or some opportunities for that post the end of the interreg funding, because again we want to make sure that we have a facility there so that we can actually see what's been happening post restoration activity. So we are looking at that and we'll be engaging with partners on that. Our Environment Challenge Fund that issued this year provided a significant opportunity for funding for additional monitoring and survey work, so that we get a much better handle on the condition of our peatlands. And I do agree with you that we have there's always more monitoring that we need to do and more data. We're always craving more detail like that. But again, I think we have loads of data and information around where our peatlands are and generally what's wrong with them. So that shouldn't be preventing action. What probably is a more novel, a new aspect to the monitoring is the whole addition of carbon emissions and carbon storage, which we didn't necessarily have included in our traditional habitat monitoring. So we are examining with others, including with CEH, and are working with are engaging with colleagues in the Republic of Ireland around how we start to put that level of carbon monitoring in, what's the right measure, equipment to be using, and developing proxy measures. So there's plenty more that we can do, but we'll let you know enough to get on with it.
Thank you. What about then, so we've got Eilidh in Scotland. Do you want to take that? And I'll let Ben and others, well, we just got Ben and Eilidh in Scotland, so I'll let you both come back on that for the Scottish perspective, the support for research and monitoring.
Yeah, I think we'd just kind of echo what others have already said about the importance of monitoring the effectiveness of the restoration work that we're doing, and that's really important, something that we have factored into the funding for direct delivery partners who are leading a lot of the work on the ground here in Scotland. But we know that we also want to do more and need to understand better about different emissions reductions potential from different types of peatland, and that comes into that part of targeting where to do it for the most cost effective work in the future. And as part of our new programme and bringing in the existing National Peatland Monitoring and Research Group in Scotland, we want to look more across the piece, like Sara just said, at all the vast amount of research and data that's out there and how we best bring that together and utilise it. And that, from a Scotland level, but also really important to think about, the data that's being collected in the other 3 nations can also be really useful, and it's important that we strengthen those links as well. So yeah, lots to do in sort of in our strategic research programme in Scottish Government. There's, you know, upcoming work to bring in new data on peatlands, but really to link it all together and utilise it better. So we're taking actions to try and do that.
Thank you. Peter Harwell?
If it's okay just for me to go first here, yeah, obviously agree with everything that's been said. I mean, just to point out, monitoring and evidence is one of our 3 cross-cutting themes, so it's something we absolutely take very seriously. And one of my colleagues on the National Peatland Programme, Dr. Esther Clues, we've appointed Esther to lead on kind of data and GIS issues so that we can really up our game significantly in capturing activity information, and then as we go forward, monitoring evidence as well. We're lucky Arwell and colleagues in Welsh Government do provide an evidence budget each year that we can tap into, so that helps greatly. And as I mentioned in the talk, we've set up a procurement framework for survey and monitoring evidence across 3 main lots of work. So I think we're getting ourselves quite well set up. We didn't do very much field-based monitoring in year 1 of the programme because we were busy setting it up, but it's something we're definitely going to work to. And just to touch on evidence, I mean, just to remind colleagues that we've got John Walker in Wales, who is in a fellowship position at Swansea University to look at our evidence needs as a community in Wales and how evidence can help address, you know, policy drivers. So a lot more to do, but I think we're slowly getting there. Resourcing is always an issue, isn't it? And but it is something, you know, we are committed to being able to demonstrate both the actual outcome of our project, as well as the kind of practical delivery element of it.
Thanks, Peter. Arwell, do you want to add anything?
Just a couple of points, really. Pete's covered most of it off there, I think. But we can see that in the National Peatland Action Programme, that sort of monitoring is a key theme running throughout it. And I think it's highly important that we do get as much information as we can, just to demonstrate, where we're taking action, and also more importantly, what the impact of that action as well. Funding is always tight, and it's going to get tighter. So we need to be sort of, clever and efficient in the way we sort of apply our resources as well. But why the work? We cover sort of soils policy as well, and we sort of take a sort of team approach to delivering this work. And Pete mentioned earlier, we do have a sort of a wider sort of evidence program. So we do sort of work cross organisation to identify evidence priorities. And this year we've been sort of fortunate in providing NRW with direct funding for evidence need, and that's sort of split 50-50 between the peatland side and the sort of soil side as well. So we hope to sort of keep that kind of arrangement growing if it's successful this year.
Thank you. So the 2 or 3 quick things out of that obviously there is a need to coordinate the vast amount of research and monitoring that goes on to make sure that we're getting the information that's helpful to us, and also to coordinate the partners. I often get the question asked, we're capable of doing a bit of research in our project, what do you want us to do, and how to do it? And it's something that I think we're going to have to get smarter at, finding ways to embrace the partnerships who have got some capacity to do survey and monitoring, and make sure that we guide them to do stuff that's really helpful and identify the gaps. And it is great to hear from Eilidh and others and Peter there that, looking in the round at what research and monitoring is going on, what it's telling us and what the gaps are, is part of the going forward with the strategies, because money is tight. There's a lot of partners out there who could help. And I think getting some of that research monitoring coordinated will be great. Looking at the next suite of questions, then it's around targets and ambition. I think the question is really around, should we move beyond some of our early goals, which were, if you look at the UK strategy to deliver X%, 90% of peatlands in good condition by 2040. And we were hearing this morning from Craig that really we need to go beyond a percentage of our peatlands being restored to, they all need to be restored. Can we really justify any continuing to be emitting? And 2040 is not far away. Should we be really ramping up our targets? Anybody want to comment on the need for greater ambition? Sophie, I'm going to pick on you. You've just been through the painful process of a strategy. Can you go and convince ministers?
Am I going to be picked on first every time?
Certainly won't.
Clifton. Okay. Sure. Of course. We need to be brave and ambitious, certainly. You know, we set the 35,000 hectare target in our action plan / strategy. I think there was a feeling that lacked ambition, but certainly it's not the limit of our ambition. It was just what we had the funding for that was guaranteed. And I think that the thing you need to watch is the net zero strategy, which will set out our long-term ambition to 2050. And for carbon budget 6 as well, and that will be around both restoration and responsible management.
Eilidh, Ben, do you want to say how? Ben, I'll see you there. That'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Clifton, and good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, just to chip in on this. I mean, absolutely. I think Eilidh referred to it in her presentation about the increasing focus we're having on carbon. So we've hitherto used hectares, but that's just a proxy for emissions. And I'd agree with Sophie there about the focus on net zero, which for us in Scotland is 2045. So we're really in the thick of this big analytical piece about what peat we restore where. So not all peatland restoration is equal in terms of carbon savings. So we need to kind of triangulate this sort of set of considerations about where we can, where it's best to invest limited funding and also to bring in blended funding from the private sector as well. That's going to deliver the most savings per hectare in terms of emissions. But Eilidh also referred to the CivTech challenge that we're running, which is also about understanding where we can bring biodiversity considerations into play, for example, to actually drive where we target peatland restoration going forward. So we do need to move away. Our climate change plan update refers to the fact that, you know, we're going to move away from just hectares-based targets to emissions-based targets effectively, and we need to do that. Our focus is on net zero. I mean, in Scotland we have 1.8 million hectares approximately of degraded peat, and I think it's unlikely we're going to be able to afford to restore all that at current restoration rates, costs rather. Which underlines the importance of bringing in private finance, absolutely, to sit alongside the public pound. But we really need to be smart about where we focus our investment to deliver maximally for carbon, for biodiversity, for flood risk mitigation, for water quality, and all the things that peatlands can do for us. So I think yeah, getting away from a hectares focus is a bit of a red herring. I think getting on to, you know, delivery of impacts sort of goes back to the previous question, and where we can most sensibly invest to deliver the most for society.
Thanks, Ben. And I'm hoping that biodiversity and water will be equal considerations. And as I said in my talk, let's not all get carbon maxed in the management of our peatlands. I'll pass on now. Ken, do you want to cover that same question for Wales?
I'll try for Northern
Ireland. You try for Wales.
Might be better for Wales, but however, yes, I must admit I agree with the comments so far. You know, it is obviously a balance between wanting to do as much as possible against, you know, what is physically achievable going forward. You know, our strategy does set out obviously quite ambitious plans to conserve, restore, and have sustainable peatland management, and that means all things to all people. Obviously, and we also mentioned earlier on, we have to work in partnership. You know, if obviously a peatland industry, as most countries will have, We have horticultural industry as well, which obviously have got maybe concerns as well. And we can't do it all as a department. We just haven't got the money. We haven't got the wherewithal for this. And I think you're right. We need to maybe get away from maybe the area of peatland to be restored, looking at the bigger picture in this way. Sara mentioned earlier about the ammonia strategy and things like that here as well. We have a green growth strategy in Northern Ireland as well. So it's a matter of trying to join all those initiatives together and go forward and see how best we do get to net zero or restore peatlands. As I say, same as Scotland, Northern Ireland will never, I suppose, in the next number of years, restore all of our badly degraded peatland. You know, some will go and take many, many decades, you know, and so it's just the nature of the problem, I suppose. So it's looking at all the range of issues affecting peatlands and looking at all the potential ways around getting there and see where it takes us in light of future budgets and future initiatives.
Thanks, Ken. And to cover Wales this time, I shall pass on to Peter and see what your thoughts are regarding ambition in our targets.
Yeah, no, great. You know, there's no shortage of ambition in Wales, and it kind of never has been. And the National Peatland Action Programme covers all peatland contexts, from the most hyper modified through to the less. So it's kind of all, you know, it's kind of all in there. But as previous speakers have said, you know, resources are inevitably limited. And the other thing we do quite rapidly come up against, just from a very practical viewpoint, is contractor capacity. I don't think that I can overstate that as an issue. Also, you know, the practical demonstration and the kind of socio-economic problem answers to restoring the hyper-modified stuff when we are talking about individual people's land, and when perhaps alternatives for agriculture on those bits of land are limited, that's got to be you know, kind of addressed as well. But you know, certainly I shouldn't speak for Arwell, but the ambition from government is very significant, and which is, you know, we're in a great position, I think.
Thanks, Peter. I would agree, zero lack of ambition, but you know, but it was something that we did sort of think long and hard when we were developing the National Peatland Action Programme. And you know, we need to be ambitious, but we need to be realistic that we can deliver. And it's something that we sort of built in as a key sort of theme to the National Action Programme. It's about building capacity year on year to deliver. I think that's what we've sort of been looking at throughout the programme. And I think as part of our programme in year 4, there'll be sort of review of where we are to date and what a future plan should look like as to scale and pace, basically. So I think, you know, we'll learn a lot over the next few years. But you know, our first year has been phenomenal in delivery. You know, over what we expected to do. You know, setting up a team and a National Peatland Action Programme last year in the middle of a pandemic was a huge challenge, and it's a massive credit to the team that they actually succeeded and delivered more than they sort of set out to do. So it's a huge congratulations to them.
Yep, definitely progress across all the 4 countries has been quite astounding. You know, when we put mechanisms in place, just what we can deliver. I've got another general question to ask all of the 4 countries, which will be about future agri-environment schemes. And it's looking at this principle of going beyond thinking about the restoration funding, but how do we maintain support for farmers who've got healthy peatlands that may never have been damaged, or recovering peatlands? How do we maintain the support for farmers through those schemes? While people are thinking on the answer to that, we have another question around archaeology and paleoecology. And I'm going to ask Naomi, what is being done in this various strategies to tackle that historic environment? So Naomi, I know you were interested in this topic. From an England perspective, what do you think is being done?
So what's been done so far is through the Peat Capital Grant Scheme, we started some work with Historic England, and we've done a guide on peatland restoration. so that the needs and requirements for archaeology, whether it's scheduled or just not scheduled, but an important area, so where a peatland makes up a palimpsest within a wider landscape area. So that is regarded, and due thought is given to the peatland restoration, because it's not just the restoration itself, it's the actually getting onto those sites can often have issues. And it's just about good mapping and thoughtfulness about, and a good protocol for how works are undertaken. So that's all set out in a document that Natural England have written with Historic England, and that after this year's restoration, we'll be revisiting for a revamp if it needs it. And there's no reason why peatland restoration can't be done in sympathy with historic environment. It certainly shouldn't be a barrier.
Thanks, Naomi. This was a key session at last year's conference, and one of the conclusions from that and in discussion since is that perhaps learning from those projects who've developed good practice standards and methods for assessing the archaeological information and safeguarding it throughout and after restoration, perhaps some work across the UK would be useful on that, so that we get some good principles and good practice guidance for projects as they plan for their restoration. Right, it's a biggie. We've only got 5 minutes left of our session, but the big question is definitely around how do we tackle this? I'll call it public payment for public benefits, but that's more of an English term these days, but it's the principle of giving support, recognizing the societal goods to land managers as we go forward. And just to cheer up Sophie, I'm going to start with Peter. How are we doing in Wales of addressing that issue?
Okay, yeah. I mean, Arwell might well need to come in with this, but we've got our new sustainable farming scheme system is coming in 2024, and we know, there's a lot of scope for that to include both peatland restoration and then the ongoing sustainable management of peat. We've submitted some thoughts on how that might look. The Welsh Government team are very receptive to those thoughts. Arwell, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I think as a team, we cover soils policy and peatland policy together, and we do have a sort of a cross-organisational group called the Soils Policy Group, which meets on a monthly basis, and that includes colleagues who are developing the sustainable farming scheme as well. So we are sort of regularly in contact with them as to how things are developing and looking at how can we sort of work together to make sure that the National Peatland Action Programme is complementing the sustainable farming scheme and vice versa as well. So there's a lot of work ongoing, and it's going to get a lot more intense over the coming months as well, because there's the agriculture bill going to the Senate by the summer of 2022. So there'll be a lot of work over the coming months to see how we can sort of integrate it and complement each other, I would expect.
Thanks. Sophie, England obviously has expressed its interest for an agriculture policy scheme that funds public benefits. Is there anything you want to say?
Sure. Well, of course, yes. Our various environmental land management schemes, sustainable farming incentive, local nature recovery and landscape recovery will be the main providers of funding for peatland, both peatland restoration and management, so ongoing management from 2024. And we're working very closely with the team developing that to ensure that peatland is considered properly, and that there is, we set out very clearly in the peat action plan that there should be no concern about how peatland that's been restored now should be treated by those schemes in the future. And we're, as I say, we're working very closely with them to ensure that.
Right. Does anybody else want to add in anything quickly on that? I could probably just move on to one other question if not.
Clifford, just to point out, I suppose, for us in Northern Ireland, agri-environment is extremely important in restoring our peatlands, and we've or indeed managing our peatlands, even once there's some restoration activity has has taken place. The environmental farming scheme already in its first 4 tranches has been funding remedial management of 24,500 hectares of our most prized peatland resource mostly in the uplands and blanket bog in the uplands and also upland heath. And again, that helps support the type of sustainable management that we need, and we'll be working with our colleagues on the agricultural policy side, who are developing the agricultural policy framework portfolio to ensure that there is sufficient support there to ensure that sustainable management continues long term.
Right, we're 1 minute over, but I'm going to ask a cheeky question because it's been so popular in the likes. We've seen Scottish Forestry issue guidance on not planting shallow peatlands, so peatlands over 10 centimetres, which is a big departure from the greater than 50 centimetres in the past. Is there any ambition to extend that restriction beyond Scotland? Does anybody else, England, Wales, is this issue of shallow peat something you've been considering in relation to forestry? And
I can say, I mean, it's certainly, like, obviously something that we're working on. So Natural England and Forestry Commission are working together to develop guidance on restoration. They've already published interim guidance for new woodland, and it's clear that planting can't be done on peat deeper than 30 centimetres or where it affects the broader hydrological unit. But as I say, that's interim guidance. And then they're currently working on guidance being developed on restocking as well. So that's the position in England at the moment.
Thank you. Nothing there. Wales, no more?
Just briefly from us, it's, we haven't got a sort of direct policy line on it as yet, but it's something we are looking into and considering further. We commissioned a piece of research last year to look at sort of impacts of tree planting on organomineral soils. That's published on our soil policy evidence page. And we also got the second part of that report currently coming to an end, looking at sort of the impact of other types of land use on organominerals, agriculture, habitats, development, that kind of thing as well. So it's very much something that we're sort of keeping in mind. We do have a sort of a PhD student in Welsh Government who's looking at this in a bit more detail over the coming months. That's a sort of 3-month placement. So that's where we are at the moment.
Brilliant. Thank you, everybody. That's us come to the end, and I hope that's been useful. The whole 4-country working together is really important, and I think the sharing that goes on across the UK is really helpful, both to each country and to the UK generically. So great to hear. And as I say, this is the year that we've all got 4-country plans. Now we get on with delivery. Thank you, everybody, and we'll leave it as there.
Thank you. Bye.